And now I also would like to thank Beth Simone Noveck. She's a New Jersey Chief Innovation Officer and Director, the Governance Lab. And I really thank her for her time to give us a keynote today. Now I would like to invite Judith Sheft, who is our advisory board member, Executive Director, New Jersey Commission on Science, Innovation, and Technology, to introduce Beth. And let's kick off the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chaya. I'm really excited to be able to introduce a fellow colleague from state government, Beth Noveck. In 2018, Beth was appointed by Governor Phil Murphy as New Jersey State's first innovation officer. In this capacity, she focuses on enhancing innovation in government and the Garden State's economy by using better data, more collective intelligence, and agile technology. Her team leads projects, designs policy, and advises agencies on innovative strategies to improve the lives of New Jerseyans. And during COVID, I am sure almost everyone who is participating in this conference was touched in some way by the various systems that her team miraculously stood up to help people get information about COVID grant opportunities, vaccination information, and job opportunities for companies. So her team has just done a phenomenal job in a really challenging time. Additionally, she serves as chair of the Governor's Future of Work Task Force and sits on the Governor's Jobs and Economic Opportunity Council. In addition to these roles, she's a professor at NYU Tandon School of Engineering, a fellow at NYU's Institute of Public Knowledge, and a visiting senior faculty fellow at the John J. Heldrick Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers University. She directs NYU's Governance Lab, an action research center studying the impact of technology on governing. She's had a lot of excellent experience, previously working in the White House as the first United States Deputy Chief Technology Officer and as a director of the White House Open Governor Initiative under President Obama. She's had international experience advising the UK government and German government. She's a graduate of Harvard University and Yale Law School, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce her and hear her excellent remarks. Over to you, Beth.
Judith, thank you so very much. I'm just delighted to be here, and I want to thank SheTek for having me and Pam10 for their sponsorship. I'm just thrilled to be here, and to all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to join me. I think this kind of peer-to-peer mentoring, especially around technology and for women in technology, is so important. And as a woman in technology, and as somebody who comes from a line of women whose lives have been transformed by technology, I just really can't applaud enough what you're doing here to really create that fellowship and mentoring and opportunity, and to encourage more people to go into technology. So we'll hopefully have lots of time for conversation and questions and reflections. I'll start with a few minutes of remarks, really focused on what I think technology is for and what we should hopefully do with it in terms of really being able to change the world for better. Whoops, let me reconnect that headset. Sorry about that. Speaking of technology, hopefully you can see my slides. I'm going to take that as a yes, unless I hear otherwise.
Awesome.
So good. Okay. I want to check before I start barreling forward. So this is a man by the name of Genrich Altschuler. You probably haven't heard of him, although if you're old enough, you might have belonged to something called a Triz Club in the 70s or in the 80s. They were very popular in the United States. He was a Russian inventor who wrote this book about the theory of problem solving. So he believed that we can teach people to solve complex problems in the world. And he wrote this book in which he outlined 40 heuristics or methods, essentially, for being better at solving problems in the world. Now, among those problems was the problem of one that maybe you've wondered about before, if you've stayed up all night once during COVID eating a box of bonbons, You might have wondered, how do they get the fruit inside the chocolate? How do they get the cherry inside the chocolate? So you would think initially, of course, that you would create the chocolate and then you would inject it somehow with the fruit syrup or fruit filling. But in fact, what that does is that only melts the chocolate. So this is a conundrum. So Altshuler says it's a great class of problem, the answer to which is to do it inversely, to do the opposite. So instead of creating the chocolate and filling it with the fruit, we instead freeze the soup, not the soup, sorry, we freeze the fruit and then we cover it with the chocolate. So the anecdote is just a class of problem that he says many problems lend themselves to the solution of doing it inversely. And you can go through his list of 40 types of solutions and see how to apply them to different kinds of technical and engineering problems. But the kinds of problems that I think many of us are either engaged with in our work or want to be engaged with, whether in our work or in our leadership in our communities, are not the kind of mechanical and engineering problems like filling candies that he talks about. They are a much more difficult class of problem. And that's what I want to talk about today, is how we can use technology and new ways of working to be able to become better at solving major challenges in the world. Now, quick footnote on Altshuler, in case you're wondering what happened to him. He was so passionate about problem solving that he wrote a letter to Joseph Stalin and said that the Soviet Union is not doing enough to teach problem solving to students. Not surprisingly, that landed him in the Gulag. But that gave him a chance to further develop his theory and to really spread this idea of problem solving. But coming back, the challenges that I think so many of us are confronting today, and of course with COVID being front and center of mind for all of us, is really a class of problems that some people call wicked problems. We can call them design problems or societal problems. They're the kinds of problems that I have the great fortune to work on with my team in the Office of Innovation every day, which is really solving hard challenges in the world. So I think as one thinks about being a leader in tech, mentoring other people to be leaders in tech, you really have to start with asking and answering the question for yourself: what kinds of wicked problems, or what I like to call public problems, really matter to you? What are the things that you're passionate about and that you care about and want to use technology to make a difference in doing? Now, I got my start in thinking about problem solving in a very curious way. I was teaching a class in intellectual property. I used to be an IP lawyer, and I was teaching a class on patents to students back when I was at New York Law School, and I was explaining to them how in those days, the US Patent Office had 1 million applications in backlog. And that meant that a patent examiner had about 15 hours to receive and review the application, do all of the research, and decide whether a patent would get a 20-year grant of monopoly rights that could fundamentally transform an industry. And so being a sort of first generation child of the web, being in the classroom at the point at which Facebook was invented and the iPhone was developed and tech was coming to the fore, it became natural for us to ask the question, why do you have one person examining a patent when you could actually use technology and create a network of scientists and technologists to be able to better examine a patent? So we developed a system called Peer-to-Patent, and long story short, it allows you to crowdsource a network of scientists and technologists to help with reviewing applications. This ended up leading to changes in the law in the United States and projects in Japan and South Korea and all around the world that fundamentally changed the relationship between the scientific community and the patent office. But it really gave me my first taste of building tech for social good, building tech that could be used to solve a problem in the world, really designing product to not simply as an entrepreneur, but as what we might call a public entrepreneur, somebody who thinks about how do I work with institutions that have budgets, that have convening power, and that have the ability fundamentally to bring about broad scale change to be able to dramatically change a process. So fast forward, my work on Peer-to-Patent is what led to my going into the White House to start the Open Government Initiative and to look at how we can create more tech products for social good, and broader than that, how we can use data and as well as other forms of innovation. And that led to, again, work in the White House, work with government leaders, as was mentioned, like Angela Merkel, and closer to home, work with my buddy, Phil Murphy, who has really put innovation and technology front and center, and had the foresight to create this idea of one of the only states, we're one of very few, that has created an Office of Innovation that is focused on building front-end tech for social good. And so many of you, as Judith mentioned, may have used covid19.nj.gov or some of the other projects that we developed together with our agency partners, who have been really, I think, path-breaking in New Jersey in terms of thinking about ways, often of using very simple tech, but ultimately it's about using tech to solve a problem, and a problem that matters to people. So I got very intrigued through my experiences in answering this question of how do we get more effective at using tech to solve problems. There's a lot of great books written about this, including the one on the two on the top, which are both written for children about problem solving, but I can recommend them highly as inspirational books that really sort of grapple with this question of how do we think about problem solving, and especially the role of tech. It is an important skill that we need to learn. Complex problem solving, as you can see from this list, is probably the most in-demand skill among employers in the private sector. It's not just a question of public sector or public good. But if we can develop our problem solving skills, we can do a lot, both to do good, but also to do well. So I think a lot of us, though, in the day and age in which we're living, given the tumultuous times we're in, are interested in what Steve Jobs referred to as making a dent in the universe, in thinking about what we can do, not simply to come up with a good idea, not simply to invent, but actually to implement, to take things from idea to implementation into reality, whether it's starting a business and trying to launch a product, or whether it's trying to build a technology or an app or change a product or service, again, to do good in the world. We really have to develop these skills that can enable us to make a dent. The Ethics of the Fathers, which is a medieval Jewish text, has this wonderful phrase that you might have heard: it's not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you're not free to desist from it either. It's incumbent, in other words, upon each of us to do what we can to make a difference, to make that dent in the universe, and to start doing this. Doesn't mean we're going to solve every big public or wicked problem, climate change, racial equity, economic inequality, the big challenge we're facing. We might need to come up with ways in which we can do what's sometimes called satisficing, coming up with something that we can make a difference on, making a small dent, even if it's not a big one. That might mean simply doing what's sometimes called changing the Overton window. In other words, shifting the debate and getting people to talk about what's possible. This is what some people describe as the benefit, whatever your politics are, of what Bernie Sanders did, is talking constantly about Medicare for all, talking about free healthcare, shifted the whole public debate to one in which, 10, 15 years ago, this was an impossibility. We would never even have had the conversation. Now we're talking about new models for innovating in healthcare. In other words, just changing the frame of the debate. So there's lots of things we can do to make a difference. But in order to make that difference, we have to have a process, a set of pathways, a set of heuristics, like Altshuler, for making a difference in the world. But it's not what Altshuler suggested. It's not about putting the cherry in the chocolate. We need a different set of skills, a different set of heuristics that can actually allow us to make change happen. But we have to have that toolkit, lest if we don't plan, if we don't know what those skills are for making change, for solving public problems, we're not going to get very far. So quick overview, having that kind of skill set, having a plan to make a plan, is extraordinarily useful for all the obvious reasons why we make business plans in the first place. And so whether, again, you're starting a business or you're thinking about doing a mission-driven project in your community, the question is, we want to be able to maximize our chance of solving problems. We want to be able to get exposure to new ideas and to new people who can help us to implement change, to collaborate, to be more powerful working together than working alone. We want to be able to ultimately implement change. And so it helps us to be able to plan, again, milestones and deliverables, to think about the steps we need to take to get things done. And we need, obviously, to be able to figure out how we're going to pull these different steps together. So it's not about just doing one kind of tech or one use of data, but really having a process, having a pathway for helping us to get things done quickly and to be able to get to implement change. So a quick word on what I see those skills are that I think we need to develop for ourselves, each one of which depends on tech or data in one shape or form. But it's not about technology as an end unto itself. It's about using technology to be able to help us define a problem, to really understand what's the problem that we're solving. And so that depends centrally on really trying to know how to use data in new ways. When we wanted to develop the COVID Information Hub as a solution to the problem of COVID and COVID misinformation, we started by trying to understand the problem by doing two things. We took the data that came from calls to 211, and we took the data that came from, whoops, sorry, that's my alarm reminding me that I'm supposed to be at SheTek. So we took the data that we got also from questions people typed into the website, and that allowed us to be able to use that data to decide what information to put front and center on the site. We did a project together with the Department of Education, and we heard from 20,000 people in 2 weeks about what are the problems that parents and students and teachers are facing with regard to their education during COVID. And we use that data again and that intelligence from people to be able to understand, how do we adapt our policies? How do we adapt our services? How do we do things differently to respond to the challenges that people are facing? It's really easy when we talk about defining a problem to define the solution as the problem. So to say, oh, there's a lack of that app or that website or that piece of technology. So we really have to be careful not to define the problem by the absence of the solution, but to really drill down and ask, what are the root causes to the problem? And then to be able to work with people, to be able to turn the problem around, turn it on its head, and ask if there's a different way of looking at the problem that might allow us to unpack and see new solutions. So that's sometimes what we might call reframing the problem. And for this, let me just give you a quick anecdote, which is the problem that some of you may have heard of, the anecdote of the slow elevator. So the hotel owner has an elevator that's too slow. He calls in the engineer and he says, the engineer says, you need to get a new elevator, a new engine for your elevator. It's going to cost $5 million. So what the hotel owner then does is, instead of the engineer, he calls in the psychologist. And the psychologist says, you know what, you have to look at the root cause of the problem in a different way. It's not that your elevator is too slow, it's that your wait is too long and too annoying. So what's the solution? A $5 mirror, some music that you pipe into the elevator. When we can work with people to actually identify what the problem is, we can then, and work with other people, we can sometimes reframe it and come up with creative solutions. So I don't want to spend much more time, so I'm not going to go into so much detail here on the rest, but let me say that problem definition is perhaps the most important skill we can develop for ourselves, especially in technology, is to ensure that we take the time to learn from people and from data what's the problem that we're solving. But then we can, of course, go out and use technology to help people to come up with solutions to problems. So, for example, the federal government has been using technology for the last 10 years to be able to ask people to solve hard problems. So we do on challenge.gov, you can go on there, and for prizes, sometimes recognition, sometimes real money, you can come up with solutions to hard social problems for agencies. And that's been done over 1,000 times on challenge.gov. But then we have to learn the skill not only of how to define problems, but how to implement solutions to problems. And that's where learning how to partner with other people, how to build coalitions, how to do things with people is extraordinarily important. In Lakewood, Colorado, their single sustainability manager, their single urban planner, Jonathan Wachtel, has used technology to build a network of 20,000 citizens doing 500 different sustainability projects as a way to make a real difference around climate change in their neighborhood. Finally, there's the skill set of really learning how to evaluate and evolve your solution. How do we scale what you're doing? And how do you figure out what's actually working? And that's where technology, again, is coming in and playing a real role. Sometimes people call this social auditing. So using technology, and I won't go into details here, but let me just say, there are a lot of instances where communities are turning to technology to ask people, how is the solution actually working? How is the law or the regulation or the app or the tool, how's it actually working for you in practice so that you can evolve what you're doing? So let me close out by saying that building this skill set for yourself of how to use data and how to use the wisdom of communities and how to use technology to enable you to do both those things, to solve problems in new ways, is a skill set that I think we all need to develop for ourselves. We need to be able to develop these skills that allow us to be able to solve problems in new ways. So these are enabled by technology, but there's not technology in and of themselves. They're new ways of working enabled by technology. Why do we need to do this? We need to do this because we have a lot of problems in the world, whether it's the acute challenge of COVID, or whether it's the chronic and long-term challenge of racial inequality or climate change or economic inequality. We each need to do our part to make change happen in the world. And so I want to leave you in the hope that you're going to use technology to do good in the world, as well as to do well, to be successful in business, but also to be successful in your own communities and to be able to bring about change. So if you need help with doing that, we've put up a free course online at solvingpublicproblems.org, and you can take the course and you can read more about how you too can be a change maker and a leader in your own community to be able to use technology to bring about civic change. For those of you wanting to do that more formally, not on the side, but as your day job, please come and join us in the New Jersey Office of Innovation. We're hiring, we're looking for technologists, and we're looking for designers, and we're looking for other kinds of professionals to help us with tackling wicked challenges in the world using data and technology. So with that, let me stop. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Beth. So now, thank you to everyone who has been sending in questions. If you want to take a look, you'll see, I'm doing hand gestures, but I'm not on the camera. You'll see at the bottom of your screen there, there's a Q&A and there's a chat box. So if you want, you can use either one of those to ask a question. I know that for me, I did come up with a question, so I'm going to use this opportunity for me. For me, Beth, what is a problem that you were excited about to make that dent of difference in today? What is getting you excited to get out of bed this morning and go innovate and make change?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I think every day the thing that gets me excited, first of all, is teaching and training other problem solvers. So I'm really excited about problem solving education, first and foremost, both inside government and outside. You know, I have taught in many different university disciplines and departments, and there's lots of people teaching things that involve working with communities or doing social good. But on the whole, universities don't really teach people how to solve problems in the real world. We've got a lot of tech education and design education that teaches you to invent new things, but it doesn't teach you how to implement things in the real world. And so I'm become really interested lately in how do we teach mission-driven leaders to become more effective and more agile? How do we borrow from the lessons learned from agile software development, for example, to be able to just get better at solving public problems? Universities in particular have spent the last generation teaching a lot of entrepreneurship. How do we teach people how to start a business? I want us to get more universities to teach public entrepreneurship. So I'm really excited about this skill set of learning how do we become more agile? How do we become more data-driven? How do we become more human-centered? I noticed Leslie Hirsch here on the participant list. Her window is in front of mine, and her work at the Department of Labor and Workforce Development is just doing a phenomenal job, really using tech and innovation and data. I hope she'll put some links in the chat to some of the projects she's working on to use innovation to do transformative work in terms of helping the unemployed get back to work, in terms of helping workers to be able to upskill and develop new skills and learning, including technology, as one of those very in-demand skills. So I'm excited in particular about applying a lot of this problem-solving work to helping workers, so that I get to work with people like Leslie and her fabulous team who are adapting to and adopting these new data-driven and human-centered ways of working in how they do their job.
All right, great. Thank you so much. We just had another question here. What do you see as your team's biggest success so far in New Jersey?
So thank you, James Baroud. Thank you for that question. An old friend who's been doing yeoman's work in terms of tech community leadership in the state is fantastic. I think, so first of all, we don't like to talk about success. As Governor Murphy aptly says, don't spike the football. We have the challenge with doing public problem solving and public and mission driven work is your job is never done. You never really solve problems like climate change and racial inequality, and you don't get to cure cancer by Tuesday. You can tackle a problem, you can make a dent, but you have to keep doing it. So I'm not going to use the word succeed. Let me say that where we've made progress that I think has been very exciting and useful is really in two areas. One is COVID gave us an opportunity, as Judith mentioned, to do a lot of really meaningful work to showcase the way that technology can be a powerful force for good. So whether it was building the COVID-19 portal or working with EDA to develop its benefits websites, or working with DOL on unemployment insurance modernization, or building the forms that you use to report report that you had a generator to donate or PPE to donate, or one of probably 100 projects, including predictive analytics, so that we could assess the spread of the virus and ensure that we didn't run out of ventilators or run out of PPE. It really, I'm very, very proud of what our team was able to do by working truly 27 hours a day on serving the people of New Jersey. But I think importantly, the biggest success was what we leave behind in terms of showcasing that working differently, that using problem solving, that using human-centered and data-driven approaches is really a better way of doing things, because it allows us to do things faster. When we stand up the COVID-19 website in 3 days and say, let us do a first version, we know it won't be perfect, but we'll iterate on it. That really helps, I hope, to be a pathway and to pave the way for more people being more agile, more experimental, and changing the culture of government. So we have a long way to go on that front. But I think we've made a little bit of a dent, hopefully, in making government more modern and being able to really better serve the information economy we're trying to build in New Jersey, by doing things like modernizing services for businesses. So if you're a tech entrepreneur out there and you want to start a business, we've been doing wonderful work under the leadership of the Business Action Center and Department of State and Treasury to be able to just make it easier for you to get all the information you need to start, grow, and maintain your business from one place. That's how government's supposed to work. It's supposed to be a seamless, easy thing that you barely notice when we're doing our job right. And so that's what we want to do more of.
All right, thank you very, very much. We had another great question from Chaya over in our chat. She asked, what are your top 2 challenges that you came across when you were working on impactful and innovative projects?
Oh, top 2 challenges. Not enough hours in the day is the perennial challenge I'm sure all of us face. And not enough hours in the day. I think though the challenge, and let me say so there's not enough hours in the day, and then there's really this piece which is around skill building, which is why I work on this. So the challenge we do not face, which some people may assume, it's very easy. Let me take a step back here. It's very easy for the press, especially, to treat government as the punching bag, to say, oh, look at the incompetence of government. And there are surely plenty of failures we can point to during COVID of leadership, of policy, especially at the federal level. I think that we saw during the last administration of our COVID response. But a lot of people, everybody that I know who works in the public sector, who's a public servant, and this is not unique to government, this exists outside of government too, people are very, very well intentioned. They want to do good. They want to make good change happen for people. They want to be successful at implementing change. But there's often just a lack of skill set. There's a lack of know-how. Somebody put something in the chat about balancing data-driven and human-centered approaches. It's not something we're born with, knowing how to use data. We're not, unless we're extremely young, we're not born knowing machine learning and how to use it. We're not born knowing how to consult with either my customers or my citizens that I'm trying to help. These are skills we need to learn. So I think the other big challenge is just know-how and really skill building and sort of developing those skills of problem solving collectively so that we can work together to make change happen. So that comes back down to, again, having enough hours in the day, but creating in the room in the hours we do have for really making change happen.
Right, great. Questions are really starting to come in so fast and furious. A great question that we just had here that really leans into what you were just talking about. Is there a course that you could take to teach problem solving? I teach Microsoft Office to job seekers, and we discussed this, but it would be a great skill to encourage people to develop versus just reading information.
Fantastic. So that was, as I mentioned at the end, solvingpublicproblems.org is the free course we've created in problem solving, and it's very intentionally free because we want there to be no disincentive to learning these skills. So we have sought philanthropic support to be able to develop those resources. And we're working on building a next generation of the platform where we're also able to teach free digital skills to people. There's wonderful free resources now in so many places, whether it's Khan Academy or Coursera or edX. Google has been creating free courses in IT skills for people. We really want to connect and expand the work that we've been doing on teaching some IT skills for public good by expanding into more on machine learning and artificial intelligence in this space. But we've been developing these free courses I think it's important that in addition to the courses, we do have more opportunities for coaching, for apprenticeship, for mentoring, for really hands-on help with applying these skills to the projects people want to do. So solvingpublicproblems.org, it's free. You can sign up there. And thanks to philanthropic support, we're going to be having the ability to also provide coaching and mentoring that we're going to be announcing in a couple of weeks. But the basics are there and you can do it on your own time or get a group together. Because I think having some encouragement from other people is really one of the important things. Being a change maker, like being an entrepreneur, really requires mentoring and it requires hand-holding because otherwise it's a pretty long and lonely road to hoe to implement change in the world.
All right, thank you very much. It definitely can feel that way sometimes. We had another question here. Can you talk about the tension, it's in quotes, quote unquote, tension between the public and the private sector and how we can incentivize businesses to care about solving social problems?
I think, more and more businesses do care, if for no other reason than they need to hire workers. And today, the millennial generation of workers, according to all the recent polling and survey data, shows that what young people want is to do well by doing good. They actually want to do mission-driven work. And so employers wanting to hire people, and above all, wanting to retain people, because turnover is expensive, need to come up with ways for their employees to do mission-driven work, to be able to work on social impact projects. So I don't see there as being, there doesn't have to be a tension. I mean, there often is because the bottom line, is focused on earning a buck, which is sometimes, yes, at odds with
we may have lost Beth's audio.
Oop, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So
All
there
right.
doesn't, I was just saying that there doesn't have to be a tension between the two. We also, in my academic work, do a lot of work with companies on sharing data for social good and what we call data collaboratives. We have a network of corporate, what you might call the next generation of corporate chief sustainability officer, and they are data sharing and data for good officials within companies who are saying, hey, the same data we collect and monetize to sell whatever product we're selling, we could also share some of that data. So for example, pharmaceutical companies who are sharing data for advances in public health, e-commerce companies that are sharing data about, and financial services companies that are sharing data about human consumption habits, human mobility, a lot of path-breaking, do-gooder research and innovation is coming from companies sharing data, but also sharing talent, giving employees time to work on social good projects, I think is just a really exciting development. So there is, you're right, a tension, because there are a lot of tensions inherent in capitalism as a system, with kind of the values often that we're trying to encourage, but there doesn't have to be a tension. And I think that more and more companies, if again, just in order to hire workers and retain them, know they need to have a component of doing well by doing good. So the best companies are able to do both. But let me say one quick thing on this note though, which is in the free course on solving public problems, we have a module on how to collaborate between public and private sector. Because there is that tension and there are those different values, we provide some tools and free resources and worksheets for how do I actually create a collaboration between, let's say, a tech company and government to be able to do something together. What are the ways in which you can actually do that? It isn't so self-evident, and having a good governance process, having a set of rules for how to manage that collaboration is something that requires a little hand-holding and help. So there's some free resources online to help you answer that question.
Great, thank you very much. I do see one more here. They said, could you maybe repeat or talk a little bit more about what services might be available from the New Jersey government to tech entrepreneurs? Is there anything you can say on that?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to ask Ed if he's here online with us somewhere to put some links in the chat to some of the work that we've been doing with Business Action Center and around the Business First Stop project. So you have access to that. But again, we've been doing work to create what's sometimes called a business first stop. In other words, to create a place where you can access all business services from one place. So if you want to start your business, you want to grow your business, you want to maintain your business, you can go to, he put it in the chat now, business.nj.gov. And that's the beginning of this business first stop. There's also a chat bot there. In other words, we're using text so that you can ask a question and get a rapid answer to a question. Again, to get free advice about your business formation, etc. And then that project is growing into a process by which we're going to make all permitting and your regulatory compliance and other things you need as a business available from one place. But just so you know, there's for a long time been something in New Jersey state government called the Business Action Center, led by Melanie Willoughby, that just does fantastic work, her team, to providing answers to entrepreneurs and people trying to start a business. And we are helping to essentially just put that on steroids a little bit by using technology to take what's in the brain of her team and put it on a chat bot so that you can get faster and more rapid answers to your questions. And again, providing a place from which you can get all the information you need to be able to know what you need to comply with as a business. So business modernization has been really, really important to us. And we're also looking for people who are entrepreneurs or represent other tech businesses who are interested in helping us to design these services where we do things in a human-centered way. That means we want to hear from you as a business and as an entrepreneur. what you need and how we can do things differently. So if we can be more responsive to what your needs are, we would love to hear from you. And again, Ed will put an email address in the chat so that you can reach out to us.
All right. So we have one more here. Somebody was really intrigued by the idea of that challenge.gov site and already went to go check it out. She was wondering if you knew if there's anywhere on that site or another place where you can submit your own challenges and your own suggested solutions on that site if you don't see it on there.
So that's a great idea. Right now on challenge.gov, you can submit solutions, but not problems, but not challenges. The challenges are posed by federal agencies there, and you can come up with solutions. However, we have been talking about and doing exactly that in New Jersey. We did a similar version of this, of challenge.gov. We did something before COVID where we were focused on asking public servants in the first instance for how we can make New Jersey government work better and more efficiently for people. That's led to a number of innovations that have been developed by different agencies. But we've been actually asking ourselves this question of could we create a place where people can both pose questions and give answers. If you want to create your own, though, for any other purpose, let me say there's a lot of these, what are sometimes called prize back challenge or open innovation sites in different domains, especially in the tech domain. So for example, there are projects like Crowdflower, which has challenges. There are projects like, now I'm gonna forget the names, and Ed, feel free to put some others in the chat and be my outsourced brain here. There's some great ones for people who know data science and want to respond to data science challenges. There's one that's been around for more than a decade called Incentive, where you can also respond to challenges. But these paid platforms are also places where you can create your own. So you can hire Incentive to run a challenge for you. And that's how it got started. It got started with a couple of pharmaceutical companies having some hard problems that their internal R&D firms couldn't solve. And so they created this network to be able to ask questions and get people to solve problems for prizes. So a number of services have sprung up that can actually enable you to run your own challenge for your own community. So if you wanted to build a community of people as solvers working on the kinds of things you care about, there are a number of platforms you can use, commercial platforms you can use for doing that. So Incentive, Crowdflower are some that come to mind, as well as then the public sector ones like challenge.gov. And Ed put our URL in the chat, team@innovation.nj.gov, if you want to reach out to us with any questions, whether it's about work that we do, or whether it's about getting a job with our office, or whether it's about any of the technologies or platforms that we've mentioned, or we can just point you in the right direction in terms of your own journey, being a mission-driven change maker in your own community. And learning how to do well by doing good.
All right, that sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any final questions? Oh, we got one more here. What was an experience that led you down this kind of path? Did you always feel drawn to problem solving your whole life, or was it a formative experience at work or something?
Well, let me say I was drawn to technology very, very early because I was raised in a house where my mother had a ticker tape machine in the house and supported the family in the early 70s with trading IBM options using a ticker tape machine. Then she later became a travel agent, and we had a technology in the house very, very early. We got the first generation of IBM PC, the first generation of Macs. My mother, my sister, my aunt, all of them, and my grandmother in a different way, all of them used technology to be able to balance, frankly, a family and work, and to be able to have a flexible work-life balance and lifestyle, you know, raising kids and being able to run a business or be engaged in the world. So it was really the tech that came first from my mother's side. And then my father was the academic, was the thinker, was the guy with the PhD who had done a dissertation about democracy. So I got interested very early in questions of democracy and of civics, and interested in the concept of mission driven. But I didn't connect the dots in many ways until I started to build some of my first product. So my very first tech startup was a mission driven kind of .org tech to facilitate distance learning and community deliberation. It was a project called Unchat, which I developed with a then Rutgers professor who's unfortunately since passed away, named Benjamin Barber, whom some of you may have heard of, wrote a book called Strong Democracy. And we started building this tech for community collaboration. That's what then later led to doing the work with government. So it really started for me with technology, and then grew into the question of how do I use technology for doing good in the world. And it was doing that work for myself and then working with a lot of innovators inside and outside of government that really taught me to realize that the most successful people have a certain skill set. They have a toolbox for change, and they have it's a very 21st century toolbox that involves using technology to be able to use data, and using technology to be able to leverage community insight and community wisdom. And it was the realization that the most successful people really had a kind of toolbox, expanded toolbox for change, that may be interested in how do we teach those skills to people.
All right. I don't see that we have any more questions right now. So
That's great, because we're out of time. So perfect.
Thank you very much. Let me see here. I'm going to drop